Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. It all began with a sound that shouldn't have been there. When my family inherited the old manor in Virginia, I expected to find nothing more than a decaying piece of history, a relic of the past that would require a little effort to restore. The house, tall and crooked, had an eerie charm that made me think of long-forgotten stories, the kind that were passed down like old heirlooms. It had always been in the family, but it had been years since anyone had set foot inside. Now, it was ours. At first, the house seemed harmless, even quaint, but the moment we set foot inside, a strange weight pressed on me. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. The basement was where it all started. We had been exploring the dark corners of the manor, dust and cobwebs clinging to everything. My sister, Clara, found it first, the door. It was strange, older than the house itself, and hidden behind a false wall. The wood was rotting, but the iron handle gleamed with an unnatural brightness. "Don't open it," my father warned. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if even speaking about it was dangerous. But I couldn't help it. The door beckoned. There was something about it, something that made my heart beat faster. I thought it was curiosity, but now I know it was something darker. We didn't open the door at first. It was locked. But that didn't stop the sounds. Soft, at first, almost like whispers. The longer we stayed in the house, the clearer they became. At night, they grew louder, a mournful wail that echoed through the basement, slipping under the door like a thread of smoke. The locals had their own stories, their own warnings. "Don't go down there," they said, eyes darting nervously. "The house, it's not what you think. There are things below that should stay hidden." But no one would explain what they meant. Just vague gestures, uneasy smiles. The whispers got worse. I lay awake in my bed, listening to the stifled sounds drifting up from below. At first, I told myself it was the house settling, the wind playing tricks. But the longer we stayed, the harder it was to ignore the feeling. It was more than just the sounds. It was a presence. A weight in the air, a feeling of being watched even while I was alone. There were nights when I'd wake up to the smell of something foul, something rotten. I tried to convince myself it was just the dampness of the old house, but the scent lingered in my nostrils long after I'd gotten out of bed. Something was down there. Something ancient. And it was waiting for us. I could see it now in the shadows, moving. Watching. The basement door no longer looked like an innocent relic of the past. It looked like a barrier, holding something in. Something that didn't belong in this world. The whispers continued to grow louder, filling my head with an incessant, maddening sound. I had to know what was behind that door. But at the same time, I feared what I might find. Clara seemed less concerned. Maybe it was because she didn't hear what I heard, or maybe she just wasn't as sensitive to the presence. But the others, my parents, they could feel it too. They stayed away from the basement, and I knew it wasn't just the smell or the decay. It was something else. By the time we decided to open the door, I was already lost to the need to understand, to uncover the truth. What was it that haunted this house? What had happened here so many years ago? As I stood before that door, hand on the handle, I felt a coldness wash over me. The air was thick with anticipation. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready for what lay behind. But I had to know. I had to find out. I turned the handle. The door creaked as I turned the handle. The sound was louder than it should have been, echoing in the silence of the basement. It felt as though the house itself had held its breath, waiting to see if I would open it. I hesitated for a moment, the cold from the door seeping into my palm. It was like nothing I had ever felt before. The metal felt wrong. Not rusted, but cold in a way that made my skin crawl. Clara stood beside me, watching with wide eyes. My parents, who had followed us down into the basement, stood a few steps behind, as though unsure whether to intervene or let me proceed. It was only my father's low, tense voice that broke the silence. "Stop," he warned. "You don't know what's in there. This isn't like other parts of the house. There are things you can't understand." But it was too late. The handle was in my hand, and there was no turning back now. I pushed the door open slowly, the sound of the hinges protesting against the weight of years, maybe decades, of neglect. As the gap widened, I felt a rush of stale, damp air hit my face, thick with the scent of something decayed. The room beyond the door was cloaked in darkness. I couldn't make out much, but there was a faint glow, something not quite natural, coming from somewhere deep within. It flickered, like the last remnants of a dying candle. The shadows danced on the walls, but the space seemed unnaturally still. There was no sound now, only the oppressive silence of something waiting. I took a step forward, the creak of the wooden floorboards underfoot almost too loud in the heavy air. My breath caught as I saw something shift in the shadows, a movement too quick for my eyes to follow, but it was there. Something was watching. I could feel it, its eyes on me, or perhaps it was the absence of eyes, something even more unsettling. My pulse quickened. "Don't go any further," my mother said from behind me, her voice shaking. I could tell she was afraid. Her warning wasn't one of reason anymore. It was a plea. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. The door had been opened, and there was something drawing me in. Clara stepped forward, her hand brushing against my arm. She didn't speak, but I could feel the weight of her gaze on my back. I knew she was just as frightened as I was, but her curiosity, like mine, was too strong to resist. Together, we stepped inside. The floor beneath our feet was slick with something I couldn't identify. It was like the air had been thickened by something that didn't belong. As we moved further in, I could hear the sound of something faint, a soft scrape. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "Do you hear that?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible, as if she feared speaking louder would attract whatever was in the room. I nodded, my throat tight. The scraping noise came again, but this time it was closer. The sound seemed to grow louder as we ventured deeper into the room until I could hear it clearly, something dragging along the ground, like chains being pulled across stone. And then, from the very corner of the room, I saw it. At first, it was only a shadow, a flicker in the dim light. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw more distant shapes, twisted and unnatural. The room seemed to stretch and distort, the walls bending inward as if the space itself was warping around me. The cold was unbearable now. It wrapped around me, sinking deep into my bones. And then I saw it clear as day. A figure, hunched and monstrous, its limbs twisted in grotesque ways that defy human anatomy. It was crouched in the corner, its face hidden in shadow, but I could feel its presence, its eyes locked on me. I froze. It wasn't human. A deep, guttural growl came from the figure's throat, low and resonating, vibrating through the very ground. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The scraping noise stopped, replaced by the heavy sound of breathing. Not from the figure. No, this was something else. Something closer. My eyes darted around the room. The walls seemed to close in, pressing against me, pushing me towards the figure. A foul smell flooded my nostrils, burning my lungs. I stumbled backward, pulling Clara with me, but the movement felt sluggish, like wading through thick water. The air was so dense, so suffocating. "Get out," my father's voice broke through the haze. I hadn't even realized he had followed us in. His voice wasn't the calm, steady tone I was used to. It was desperate. Raw. Now. We turned, but the path to the door seemed impossibly far. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the room itself were trying to hold me in place. The creature in the corner shifted, its limbs jerking unnaturally as it began to move toward us, its head tilting at an impossible angle. Clara screamed. The sound echoed in the suffocating silence. I didn't know what happened next. One moment, we were running, desperate, out of breath, and the next, we were at the door. The air felt lighter, the pressure on my chest easing as I grabbed the handle and threw the door open. We spilled out of the room, back into the cold, damp basement. The door slammed shut behind us with a deafening thud. We stood there, panting, staring at the closed door. But I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The creature was still there. I could feel it, its presence lurking just beyond the threshold. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew it was waiting. Waiting for us to make the next move. We had opened the door. And now, the door would never be closed again. I turned to look at Clara. She was pale, trembling, her eyes wide with fear. I felt the same. The world around me seemed distant, out of focus. And then, as I glanced toward the stairs, I saw something that made my stomach churn. The door to the basement was wide open. The one we had just closed. It was open, but no one had touched it. And from behind that door, I could hear the whispers again. Only now, they were closer. Much closer. The air around me was thick with something I couldn't explain. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, my hand gripping the banisters so tightly my fingers were numb. The door to the basement was open. It shouldn't have been. Clara was beside me, her breath ragged, her face pale, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I had to focus on the door. There was a low hum coming from the dark space beyond it. A vibration in the air that rattled my chest, like the sound of an old, broken engine struggling to start. The whispers, that quiet, maddening noise we'd heard before, grew louder. I felt the cold creeping from the open door, as if it were a living thing, reaching out with icy fingers, brushing against my skin. "Dad," Clara whispered. She was clutching my arm now, her fingers shaking. "Dad, what's happening?" I couldn't answer. I didn't have the words. My mouth felt dry, as though the words had been stolen from me by the suffocating air around us. From the open door came a shuffling sound, faint at first, but growing louder, like something moving, no, crawling, through the dust-ridden basement. It was too slow, too deliberate. Every scrape of something sharp against the floor sent a shiver down my spine, my skin crawling as if I could feel its movements, though I saw nothing. "I didn't hear this last time," Clara said, her voice shaking. "We didn't hear it." "No," I whispered, barely able to breathe. "It's not the same. It wasn't like this before." And it wasn't. The air was different now, heavier, thick with a presence I could no longer ignore. The house seemed to be holding its breath, as if even the structure itself were terrified of what had been unleashed. We couldn't stay here. The door was wide open, and I knew that if we didn't leave now, whatever was behind it would come crawling out and follow us. My heart raced, and for a moment, my feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. My mind screamed at me to move, but my body wouldn't obey. Clara pulled at my arm. "We have to leave. Now." I nodded, but my legs felt weak, trembling beneath me. I turned away from the door, and that's when I saw it, the shadow in the hallway. It wasn't a shape, not really, but a distortion in the darkness, something unnatural, like a wound in the very fabric of reality. It was watching us, and though I couldn't see it clearly, I felt its eyes on me. I knew it was waiting. "Move," I said, my voice low and strained. Clara didn't hesitate. We ran up the stairs, but just as we reached the landing, the door slammed shut behind us with a violent crash. I turned back, my breath caught in my throat. The door. It had been closed. But it wasn't supposed to be. I had just seen it open. And then there was a sound. A thudding, rhythmic, like something heavy was moving behind the door. The house groaned under the weight of it, like it was alive and struggling to contain whatever was inside. "Please," I heard my mother's voice behind me, weak and panicked. "What did you find down there? What is it?" I didn't have the strength to answer her. My chest was tight, my throat raw with fear. We couldn't go back down there. But the whispers, the dragging sound, it followed us. I could hear it, soft at first, but growing louder with each passing second. The air seemed to pulse around us, like it was closing in. Suddenly, the lights flickered, the old bulbs overhead buzzing with a deafening crackle. I turned to Clara, who was staring at the ceiling in terror. "What's happening?" "What do we open?" she whispered. The house felt alive now, its walls vibrating with an unnatural hum, as though it was coming to life. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath in the air. It wasn't the basement anymore. The entire house felt wrong, twisted, as though it was pulling us deeper into something we couldn't escape. I couldn't think. I grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her towards the stairs, but as we reached the top, the noise came again. Closer now. It was coming from every direction, from inside the walls, from beneath the floors. I couldn't tell what it was. My ears rang with the sound, the scraping, the growling, the whispers. "Run!" I shouted. The words left my mouth like a plea, like I was trying to convince myself as much as her. We ran down the hall, but every room we passed felt colder, darker. The air was heavier, and the sound, the noise from behind the door, was growing louder. My father, who had been silent up to this point, grabbed my shoulder. "We need to leave. This house, it's cursed. There's something evil here. I should have told you." I didn't want to believe it. But now it's awake. "What do you mean?" I spun around to face him, my chest tightening. "What happened here?" His eyes were wide, his hands shaking as he grabbed the edge of the wall for support. "It's not the house. It's what happened to the people before. the ones who built it. They weren't just settlers, they were something else. And they did things in that basement. Things that shouldn't have been done. What kind of things? Clara demanded, her voice sharp with panic. But my father didn't answer. Instead, he just shook his head, and the fear in his eyes made me realize he wasn't just afraid of what was in the basement. He was afraid of the house itself. We could hear the noise again. A thumping sound, distant, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. It was coming from all around us now, from beneath the walls, from within the foundation. We needed to get out. But as I turned to lead Clara toward the front door, I saw it. A figure, no, a shadow, looming in the hallway. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that twisted and bent in unnatural ways. The shadows around it rippled as though the air itself were warping in its presence. I froze. And then the whispering started again. But this time, it was louder. Clearer. It was calling my name. The figure in the hallway didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. I could feel the air around me vibrate with the weight of it, as though the very house was holding its breath. Clara gasped beside me, her hand trembling in mine, but neither of us dared to look away from the dark shape ahead. It stood there, in the shadows, watching us with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't human, no, it couldn't be. The way it towered over us, its limbs long and twisted, seemed to stretch the very limits of what was possible. But it wasn't just its form that terrified me. It was the presence of something ancient, something older than the house itself, that radiated from it. The whispering grew louder, clearer, more insistent. My name over and over. Soft at first, like a distant echo, but then it started to form in my mind, a chorus of voices, some familiar, some not. Each whisper felt like a needle, sharp and cold, digging into my skull, sending a wave of dread through my body. Eli, the voice was clear now. My father's voice. But it was wrong, twisted, like something trying to mimic him. You shouldn't have opened it. I tried to step back, but my legs felt frozen, like they were bound by some invisible force. It was as if the house itself was drawing me in, pulling me toward the thing standing in the dark. We need to leave, Eli, Clara whispered urgently, her grip tightening on my hand. We need to get out of here. It's not safe. But I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the shadow. The longer I looked at it, the more it felt like it was looking back at me. The whispers, my name, became louder, overlapping with the sound of something scraping along the floor. A dragging noise, like chains being pulled across stone. Eli, the voice again, this time accompanied by a low, guttural growl. It wasn't my father this time. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was something else. You've come too far. My heart hammered in my chest, and I took a step back, trying to tear my gaze away, but the shadows seemed to follow my every movement. There was no escape from it, not physically, not mentally. It was in my mind now, the whispers echoing in my thoughts, too many to ignore. I turned to look at my parents, but they were gone. The hallway was empty. Clara and I were alone now. The door at the end of the hall, the one that led outside, was nowhere to be seen. It had vanished, replaced by more walls of darkness. We were trapped. Clara, I whispered, my voice shaky. I didn't know what was happening, but I could feel it. Something was changing, shifting around us. The house was no longer just a house. It was a prison, one we had opened the door to, one we couldn't escape from. Clara was staring at the space where the door had been, her eyes wide with terror. "Eli," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look." I turned to her, but as I did, the shadows seemed to move, shifting in and out of the darkness. It wasn't just standing there anymore, it was closing in, slithering toward us, its limbs unnaturally long, twisting and stretching as if the space itself couldn't contain it. Then, I saw something else. The floor beneath our feet began to crack, slowly at first, like a web of fractures spreading across the ground. And from the cracks, something wet began to seep out. It was dark, thick, and oozing, like oil. The smell hit me like a physical blow, sour, pungent, like rot. It flooded the room, the very air becoming saturated with it. "No!" Clara cried out, stepping backward, but the floor was already breaking apart beneath her. The cracks widened, splitting like the earth itself was tearing open, and from the depths of the blackness below, a cold gust of air rushed up, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers. I grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her away from the chasm that was opening beneath us. The ground felt unstable, as though it could collapse at any moment. We had to get out. We had to find a way out. But the shadow was closer now, its form becoming more defined as it emerged from the darkness, its body twisting like smoke. Its face, if it could even be called that, was a blur of shifting shapes. There were eyes, or what I thought were eyes, staring out from deep within the shadow, endless black holes that seemed to draw out all light around them. I could feel it pulling in my mind, wrapping its tendrils around my thoughts, suffocating me with fear. My breath came in shallow gasps, my body trembling, every part of me screaming to run, but I couldn't move. It was like the fear had taken root in me, like I was paralyzed by it, unable to escape. The whispers rose to a crescendo, a chorus of voices chanting my name, growing louder, faster, until it was all I could hear. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, and I felt my mind beginning to crack under the pressure. Suddenly, a deafening crash broke through the noise. The sound of wood splintering. The wall behind the shadow was ripped open as if by some unseen force, revealing a dark, yawning void. And from within that void, something reached out. I didn't have time to think. Something in me broke, and with a final burst of adrenaline, I shoved Clara away from the crack in the floor and toward the wall. "Run!" I screamed. We ran, stumbling over the broken floor, crashing into walls, but the darkness followed, wrapping around us like a blanket. We couldn't outrun it. I could hear it, feel it, growing closer with every step. The shadow was chasing us, its whispers trailing behind us, growing louder and louder until they consumed everything. Then, just as I thought I could go no further, I saw it. The door. The front door. Somehow, it had reappeared, standing there at the end of the hall. My heart leapt in my chest, and without hesitation, I grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her toward it. But the shadow was faster. I felt its cold tendrils wrap around my ankles, dragging me backward, pulling me away from the door. My fingers scraped against the doorframe, but I couldn't hold on. The whispers were deafening now, and the ground beneath me seemed to melt away, swallowed by the darkness. "Clara!" I screamed, but my voice was drowned out by the cacophony of sound. And then, everything went black. The last thing I heard was the voice. The same voice that had been whispering my name. "You've come too far." And this time, it wasn't just in my mind. It was real. And it was right behind me. I awoke in darkness. I don't remember how I got here. One moment, I was being dragged away from the door, my fingers slipping, my body sinking into the shadows. The next, I was lying on cold stone, the air heavy with the same suffocating pressure that had pressed in on me from the moment I first entered this cursed house. I opened my eyes slowly, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at my limbs. My head throbbed, my body sore, but the pain was nothing compared to the terror gnawing at my chest. The house. It was alive. I had felt it before, in the whispers, in the shadows, but now I knew it was true. This house, it didn't just house the darkness. It was a part of it. I sat up, but the motion felt like moving through syrup. My body resisted, each movement sluggish, as if the very air was thickening around me. As I slowly rose to my feet, I realized I wasn't alone. The cold, damp stone beneath me was familiar, too familiar. The basement. We had ended up back in the basement. But how? I stumbled toward the wall, my hand reaching out to steady myself as the cold stone met my fingers. The faint glow from earlier, the one that had flickered in the corner of my eye when I had first opened the door, was now brighter, casting an eerie light across the room. It didn't come from any source I could pinpoint, and yet it bathed the entire basement in its sickly, unnatural glow. The shadows danced around me, moving in ways they shouldn't, warping and stretching, like they were alive. I had to find Clara. She had been with me. She had been at my side. But now, as I looked around the dim room, I couldn't see her. The fear in my chest began to grow, swelling like a balloon about to burst. My heart hammered in my chest as I called her name. Clara. No answer. Only the sound of my own voice echoing back at me, bouncing off the stone walls in distorted whispers. The cold seemed to seep deeper into my skin, spreading like poison until I could barely feel my hands. My breathing became shallow, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of movement. Then I heard it, the same dragging sound. The scraping, slow and steady, as if something large was being pulled across the floor. It was coming from the far corner of the room, from behind the shadows, where the light couldn't reach. I took a hesitant step forward, my mind screaming at me to turn around, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The noise grew louder, the dragging sound dragging through the air like chains scraping on stone. Clara? I whispered, my voice trembling. Please, answer me. Nothing. The shadows in the corner shifted, a form emerging from the darkness. It was there, in the periphery of my vision, but I couldn't make it out clearly. It was too dark. I took another step, the floor creaking under my feet, and the shape took form. Something humanoid, but twisted, its body hunched and wrong. The figure's limbs were too long, the joints bending at unnatural angles. Its head lolled to one side, as if it didn't quite fit with the rest of its body. And those eyes, those empty, soulless black eyes, stared at me from the shadows, unblinking, as if it were waiting for something. Waiting for me. A low, guttural growl came from deep within the creature's throat, vibrating the air around me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, staring at the thing before me, unable to look away. The scraping sound stopped, and in the heavy silence, I heard something else. A voice. A whisper. But it wasn't the shadow's voice. It wasn't the growl of whatever was lurking in the dark. No. This voice was far more familiar. Eli. It was Clara's voice. But it was distorted, twisted by something dark. It sounded like her, but wrong. Like a version of her that had been warped, changed by whatever was living in this house. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as the voice called me again. Eli, come closer. I tried to move, but my body felt like it was stuck in place, caught between terror and curiosity. The voice was calling me, urging me to come closer, but deep down, I knew it wasn't Clara. It couldn't be. I had seen the thing lurking in the shadows. I had heard its growl. And now, it was pretending to be her, pretending to lure me closer. No, I whispered, forcing myself to step back. My legs felt weak, like they wouldn't support me, but I had to get away. I had to survive. I had already lost too much. If Clara was still out there, I couldn't afford to lose her too. I turned, my feet unsteady beneath me, and stumbled toward the exit. But the door, it wasn't there. The door I had come through was gone, replaced by more stone walls that seemed to close in around me, tightening like the grip of a vice. I had no way out. The house had trapped me. There was no escape. And then the whisper came again, louder this time, as though it were right beside me, breathing into my ear. Eli, you shouldn't have opened the door. I spun around, panic rising in my chest. The creature was gone. The shadows had swallowed it up again, but I could still feel it, its presence, lurking just out of sight. Watching. The air was thick with an oppressive silence. My thoughts were a tangled mess of fear and confusion. I had to escape, but the house wasn't letting me. It was playing with me, toying with my fear, feeding on it. The longer I stayed, the weaker I felt, as though my very soul was being drained by the darkness that clung to every corner of the manor. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled. The house shook, the walls cracking as if the very structure was being torn apart. The lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the room. My heart raced. Was this it? Was the house collapsing? Or was something else happening? The shadows began to move again. Not in the corner this time, but everywhere. The very air seemed to shift, the darkness pressing in from all sides, pulling at me, suffocating me. The whispers grew louder, the voices all blending into one, echoing in my mind. Eli. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in on me, and the shadows were everywhere. They weren't just in the room anymore, they were in my mind, in my very soul. And then, I understood. The house didn't just want to trap us. It wanted to keep us. Forever. In that moment, the realization hit me with the force of a punch to the gut. The price of curiosity was steep. I had opened the door. I had come too far. And now, the house was claiming its due. Do you ever hear the whispers in the trees? The question hung in the air like fog, thick and suffocating. It was a warm afternoon in Pennsylvania, the kind of day that lured people outside, but I felt the chill seep into my bones. I walked through the park, the grass lush and inviting, but there was something wrong. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like gnarled fingers reaching out. I could hear the laughter of children nearby, yet it felt distant, muffled by an unseen weight. My name is Ethan, and I was drawn to this park by stories. Tales of a forgotten asylum, of the souls who once roamed these grounds, trapped in a nightmare that never truly ended. I had come here seeking solace, a quiet place to clear my mind after a recent loss. But as I stepped deeper into the shaded paths, an unsettling feeling wrapped around me like a vine. I stopped, trying to shake off the sensation. Just a trick of the light, I thought. The sun peeked through the leaves, casting shifting shadows on the ground. Yet, as I turned to continue my walk, I caught a glimpse of something, an old figure in a white gown slipping between the trees. My heart raced. Had someone else wandered this way? I blinked, and it was gone. The laughter of children faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Still, the air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't understand. I pressed on, hoping to lose myself in the beauty of nature. The deeper I walked, the more the familiar surroundings transformed. The path narrowed, twisting like a serpent. The trees closed in, their trunks thicker, their leaves darker. I could almost smell something, an acrid scent, like burnt fabric mixed with decay. I brushed it off, reminding myself that parks had their oddities. But then I heard it, a soft whisper, drifting through the air, barely audible. "Help me." The voice was faint, but it sent shivers down my spine. I paused, my breath catching in my throat. Was I losing my mind? No one else was around. I was utterly alone. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking behind me, but the path was empty. I tried to rationalize what I felt. Maybe it was just the wind playing tricks. Maybe the stories had planted seeds of fear in my mind. But deep down, I felt something lurking in the corners of my consciousness, a truth I couldn't quite grasp. As I walked on, the whispers grew louder. They wove around me, a haunting melody that tugged at my sanity. "Help me, remember," the words wrapped around my mind, pulling me deeper into the heart of the park. I fought against it, my instincts screaming to turn back, but curiosity propelled me forward. What had happened here? What darkness lingered in these woods? The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched toward me. I felt eyes on me, watching from the thickets. The air shifted, and I could sense a presence, an energy that thronged just beyond the edges of my perception. My pulse quickened, and I began to feel a sense of panic rising. I stumbled upon a clearing, a small space where the trees parted, revealing a forgotten structure, half buried under layers of vines and foliage. It was the remnants of the asylum, its crumbling walls whispering secrets of the past. I stepped closer, drawn to it against my better judgment. A chill washed over me as I reached out to touch the weathered stone. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the world. But the whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices pleading for release. "Remember us," I shivered, fear wrapping around me like a shroud. I took a step back, my heart pounding, the weight of the past pressing down. In that moment, I realized I was not alone. The park was alive, teeming with the echoes of lost souls, and I had awakened something that should have remained buried. I turned to flee, panic coursing through my veins, but the path back felt different, twisted in ways I couldn't comprehend. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches heightened my terror. I was trapped in a maze of memories, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Help me, help us." I ran, the ground uneven beneath my feet, the shadows shifting as if alive. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, but the darkness loomed ahead, a threatening presence that would not let me go. The fear was palpable now, clinging to me like sweat. I stumbled forward, desperate to break free, but the park had changed. It had morphed into something unrecognizable, a labyrinth of sorrow and despair. And in the depths of the trees, I felt them watching, waiting, whispering the truth that I was not ready to confront. I stumbled through the trees, my heart pounding in my chest like a frantic drum. The whispers surrounded me, enveloping my thoughts in a shroud of dread. I could feel the weight of history pressing against my back, each step heavier than the last. Panic surged through me as I fought to remember the way back, but the familiar paths had twisted into something alien, every direction feeling like a trap. The light was fading, the sun dipping below the horizon, and the shadows deepened, creeping across the ground like dark tendrils. I could hear my breath, ragged and loud, drowning out the whispers for a moment. I glanced back, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the gloom. Nothing. Just the oppressive silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves. I forced myself to keep moving, but with each step, I felt the world around me shift. The trees, once merely background, began to take on an ominous presence. Their gnarled branches twisted like skeletal hands, and the trunks seemed to loom taller, blocking out what little light remained. It was as if the very forest was alive, and it didn't want me to leave. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again, the flicker of light. A figure in a hospital gown, barely visible between the trees. My heart dropped. Was I losing my mind? The stories had warned of apparitions, but I hadn't expected to see one so vividly. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the echo of soft sobs lingering in the air. "Help me, remember," the voice came again, this time clearer, more insistent. It seemed to rise from the ground itself, a chorus of sorrow that seeped into my skin. I felt a chill wash over me, making the hair on my arms stand on end. I had to get out of this place. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same: twisted roots, darkened branches, the suffocating canopy above. A sense of despair wrapped around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I forced myself to focus, scanning the area for any sign of the path I had come from. Then I heard it again, a rustling, more pronounced this time, as if something was moving through the underbrush. I turned sharply, heart racing. Nothing. Just the wind whispering through the leaves. My rational mind fought against the rising tide of fear, but I couldn't ignore the cold knot forming in my stomach. I felt trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. With a deep breath, I pressed forward, pushing through the thick undergrowth, desperate for any sign of an exit. As I moved deeper into the woods, I stumbled upon a dilapidated building, half hidden by vines and brambles. It stood there, a ghost of the asylum, its broken windows like empty eyes staring into my soul. I felt an inexplicable pull toward it, curiosity battling with my instinct to run. What lay within those crumbling walls? I hesitated at the threshold, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like rust. It felt wrong, yet I stepped inside, driven by an unseen force. The interior was dark, the remnants of a once bustling facility barely recognizable. Old chairs lay scattered, some overturned, while remnants of torn fabric and shattered glass littered the floor. The air was stale, heavy with the weight of forgotten stories. I shivered, the shadows wrapping around me like a cloak. As I ventured further, the whispers crescendoed into a symphony of anguish. "Help us, we're still here," they echoed off the walls, reverberating in my mind. I could feel my pulse quicken, fear gripping me as I fought against the urge to flee. Who were they? What had happened to them? In the corner of the room, I spotted a diary, its pages yellowed and frayed. I picked it up, heart racing, and opened it. The writing was frantic, scrawled in a way that spoke of desperation. Words tumbled forth. "They don't understand. The pain. We are trapped." My breath caught. I could feel the despair radiating from the pages, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. I turned to leave, but the sound of footsteps echoed behind me, slow, deliberate. My heart stopped. I turned, dread pooling in my stomach. In the dim light, I could make out a shape, a figure emerging from the shadows, shrouded in the remnants of a tattered hospital gown. Its face was obscured, but I could see the outline of hollow eyes staring back at me. "Help us," it whispered, a voice that clawed at my sanity. Panic surged within me, and I stumbled back, crashing into a pile of debris. I had to escape. I dashed toward the door, but the figure moved with an unnatural speed, blocking my path. I could feel the chill emanating from it, a void that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. I was frozen, caught in a moment where time stood still. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, echoing the pain and suffering that filled this place. "Remember us," the figure repeated, its voice a haunting melody that filled the room. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but the cries pierced through my defenses. I had to remember, but remember what? The connection to the past tightened around me like a noose, squeezing the breath from my lungs. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged to the side, barreling through the doorway and into the night. The cool air hit my face, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. I didn't stop to look back, fear propelling me forward, deeper into the maze of trees that now felt more like a prison than a park. But as I ran, I could still hear them, the whispers, the cries, echoing in my mind. They were part of me now, and there was no escaping the past. I had uncovered something that could never be forgotten, and I knew I would never truly be free until I faced it. The night air was sharp against my skin as I stumbled deeper into the woods, the ground uneven beneath my feet. My breath came in ragged gasps, a frantic rhythm that echoed in the stillness. I forced myself to push through the branches that clawed at me like desperate hands, each snap of twigs beneath my shoes amplifying the fear coursing through my veins. I had escaped the figure in the asylum, but its presence clung to me like a shadow. The whispers followed, a relentless chorus echoing in my mind, merging with the sound of my heartbeat. I stumbled into a small clearing, the moonlight spilling through the trees, casting an ethereal glow. For a moment, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, but it was short-lived. The silence of the woods felt pregnant with tension, as if the very air was waiting for something to happen. I leaned against a tree, trying to catch my breath, but my thoughts raced. What had I seen? Who was that figure? The words from the diary echoed in my mind. "They are trapped." My stomach twisted. I had uncovered a fragment of a history that was buried deep, and now it was clawing its way back into the present. I scanned the clearing, searching for any sign of life, any escape from the nightmare that had consumed me. But the trees stood tall and silent, their trunks like prison bars enclosing me in a cage of shadows. I took a moment to collect my thoughts, to shake off the creeping panic that threatened to overwhelm me. The park had once felt like a sanctuary, but now it was a labyrinth of horrors. The whispers returned, softer this time, almost coaxing. "Help us, remember," they wrapped around me, tugging at the edges of my sanity. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to focus. I needed to understand what was happening. I couldn't run forever. I had to confront whatever darkness lurked in this place. With a newfound resolve, I pushed myself away from the tree, moving back toward the asylum. The memories flooded back, and I could still feel the remnants of the figure's icy breath on my skin. Each step felt heavier, the forest closing in around me. As I approached the entrance again, I hesitated, the weight of dread pulling at my insides. But I couldn't turn back. I had to face this. I stepped inside, the musty air wrapping around me like a shroud. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and the shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. I took a deep breath and called out, my voice trembling. "Who are you?" What do you want from me?" The silence was deafening, but then I heard it, the soft rustling of fabric, the faintest whisper of movement. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. The figure emerged from the shadows once more, its form barely illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the broken windows. "Remember," it breathed, and I felt a chill sweep through the room. The air thickened, charged with emotions that were not my own. I stepped back, heart racing, but something deeper compelled me to stay. There was a connection I couldn't deny, a pull that urged me to listen. "Who are you?" I asked again, my voice steadier this time. "What happened here?" The figure seemed to shift, the moonlight catching the hollowed contours of its face, revealing sunken cheeks and dark eyes that spoke of sorrow. "We were lost, abandoned," it paused, the air heavy with unspoken grief. "You must remember the truth." I felt a jolt, as if the words pierced through the fog of fear that surrounded me. "The truth? What truth?" I stared into the figure's eyes, and in that moment, something inside me stirred. I could almost hear the distant echoes of laughter, the cries of pain, the voices of those who had once inhabited this place. The atmosphere shifted, memories flooding back. I saw flashes, a young girl in a white dress, crying in a corner, a man shouting in anger, his voice lost to the walls, a woman, eyes wide with fear, running through the halls. The images flickered like an old film reel, disjointed yet vivid. "Help us, remember," the figure urged again, and I felt a wave of sorrow wash over me. These were not just echoes of the past, they were cries for recognition, for understanding. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to push through the fear. "I will help you," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "But I need to know what happened. What do you want me to remember?" The figure pointed to a doorway at the back of the room, one I had overlooked before. "The truth lies within. You must face it." I hesitated, the weight of dread settling in my stomach. But I had come too far to turn back now. I nodded, steeling myself for whatever waited me beyond that door. As I approached, I could feel the air grow colder, a palpable energy thrumming in the space. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling. I pushed the door open, and a wave of cold washed over me. The room beyond was dark, the walls lined with peeling paint and forgotten memories. I stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw it, a large mirror, its surface cracked and dusty, reflecting the faintest glimmer of light. I moved closer, drawn to it, as if it held the key to understanding. But as I peered into the glass, the reflection shifted. It showed not just my face, but the faces of those who had suffered here, patients with hollow eyes, lost souls reaching out from the depths of despair. I gasped, stumbling back. "No, this can't be real." My heart raced as the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of cries, pleading and mournful. "Help us, remember." And in that moment, the truth hit me like a tidal wave. I was not just a witness, I was part of their story, tied to the past in ways I could not yet comprehend. This was more than a park built on ruins, it was a testament to the horrors that had unfolded here, and I had unwittingly stepped into the role of the seeker, searching for answers that had long been buried. I could feel the weight of their sorrow pressing down on me, and I knew I had to confront the reality of what had transpired in this place. I took a deep breath, ready to face whatever awaited me in the depths of that reflection, ready to unearth the memories that had haunted these woods for so long. I stood before the cracked mirror, heart racing, the air thick with an almost tangible tension. The reflections twisted and turned, faces emerging from the shadows of my mind, lost, broken, and desperate for release. The whispers escalated, filling the room with an urgency that made my skin crawl. "Help us, remember." My hands trembled as I reached out to touch the glass, but just before my fingers met the surface, a cold wave washed over me. A vision struck, vivid and all-consuming. I was no longer just an observer. I was thrust into the past, immersed in the haunting memories of the asylum. Suddenly, I was in a dimly lit corridor, the walls stained with age and neglect. Flickering lights overhead cast eerie shadows, distorting the figures that passed by. I could hear the sound of metal on metal, the clang of doors slamming shut, the soft padding of worn shoes on the cold floor. The air was filled with a symphony of muffled cries, laughter that turned into sobs, and the distant echo of a nurse's reprimanding voice. I turned to see a group of patients huddled together, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. One woman, her hair disheveled, clutched a tattered doll to her chest. "They don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We're not dangerous. We just want to be free." The vision flickered, and I found myself in a cramped room with peeling wallpaper, the stench of despair hanging thick in the air. In the corner, a man sat, muttering to himself, his gaze lost in a world only he could see. A nurse entered, her expression cold and detached. "Time for your treatment," she said, her voice devoid of empathy. He flinched at her words, fear etched on his face. "Please, don't," he pleaded, but she moved closer, a syringe glinting in her hand. The scene shifted again, and I was thrust into the midst of chaos. Screams erupted around me as patients were dragged away, their cries echoing down the hall. I felt their pain as if it were my own, a visceral agony that tore at my insides. "Remember us," the voices intertwined, a haunting chorus that resonated deep within my soul. I was overwhelmed by their stories, the injustices they had faced, the cruelty of a system that had long since forgotten them. I could feel their anger, their sorrow, and their desperate need for someone to acknowledge their existence. Suddenly, the scene shifted again, and I stood in a stark, white room. A group of doctors surrounded a table, their faces grim. "We need to push the boundaries of treatment," one declared, his voice firm. "They're nothing but experiments now. We must see how far we can go." I gasped as I realized what I was witnessing, an era of inhumane practices, where lives were reduced to mere data points, where compassion was a forgotten concept. The doctors moved with cold efficiency, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I recognized the darkness that had seeped into these walls. Then, a figure caught my eye, a young girl, no more than 10, standing alone in the corner. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You can't break us," she declared, her small voice strong. "We will remember, and we will rise." The vision began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled back into the present, the whispers growing quieter but never fully retreating. I stumbled back, breathing heavily, the weight of their memories crashing over me like a tidal wave. I was not just a bystander, I had become a vessel for their anguish, their stories woven into the fabric of my being. I looked back at the mirror, my heart pounding. The faces that had once seemed distorted now stared back at me with a glimmer of hope. "You see us," they whispered, a unity of voices echoing in my mind. "You can help us find peace." But how? I felt lost, overwhelmed by the burden of their pain. I had come seeking solace, but instead, I had unearthed a truth that demanded action. I could no longer ignore the shadows that haunted this park, nor could I dismiss the cries for justice. As I turned away from the mirror, I felt a renewed sense of purpose rising within me. I had to confront the history that had been buried beneath layers of neglect. I had to honor the voices that echoed through these woods, to give them the recognition they deserved. I stepped back into the hallway, determination fueling my steps. The whispers faded into a solemn silence, as if the spirits of the asylum were waiting for me to act. I would not let their suffering be in vain. I would dig deeper, uncover the truth behind the asylum's legacy, and share their stories with the world. With each step, I felt the weight of the past pressing against me, but it was now accompanied by a flicker of hope. I was not alone. The memories of those who had suffered would guide me. Their resilience would fuel my quest for justice, and I vowed to bring their stories into the light. As I emerged from the building, the moon hung high in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the park. The trees swayed gently in the night breeze, as if whispering their own secrets. I took a deep breath, ready to face whatever awaited me, determined to shine a light on the darkness that had lingered for far too long. The journey had only just begun, but I felt a sense of clarity. I would not let fear dictate my path. I would confront the past and fight for those who could no longer fight for themselves. The park, once a place of beauty, would become a beacon for truth, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a reminder that the past, though painful, could illuminate the way to healing. The air outside felt different, charged with possibility and heavy with the weight of the past. I stood at the threshold of the asylum, the memory of the whispers still ringing in my ears. The night enveloped me, but instead of fear, a flicker of determination ignited within. I knew I had to act, to bring the stories of those lost souls into the light, to confront the darkness that had cloaked this place for far too long. I took a deep breath, allowing the cool night air to fill my lungs. The park, once a tranquil escape, now felt like a battleground between the past and the present. I could sense the spirits still lingering, their energy pulsating through the trees, urging me forward. Each step I took felt like a promise to them, a vow to honor their stories and seek justice for their suffering. With renewed purpose, I made my way back toward the main path, the echoes of the asylum's history whispering in my mind. I envisioned how I would share their stories, through writing, through speaking, through sheer persistence. But first, I needed more information. I had to dig deeper into the history of this place, uncover the truth that had been shrouded in silence. As I walked, the trees loomed taller, their branches intertwining above me like fingers grasping at the sky. I felt an unsettling sensation that I was being watched, but I pressed on, determined not to let fear creep back in. I thought of the young girl's defiance, the strength that resonated in her voice, and I knew I had to channel that same courage. Reaching the park's visitor center, I pushed open the door and stepped inside, the warm light contrasting starkly with the chill outside. The room was filled with brochures and artifacts, remnants of the park's history, but I could sense something else, a lingering tension, a presence that hinted at stories untold. I approached the front desk, where an older woman sat, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked up, surprise flickering across her features. "You're back," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of familiarity. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I need to know more about this place," I replied, urgency lacing my words. "About the asylum that used to be here. What really happened?" Her eyes darkened, a shadow passing over her face. "Most people don't want to remember. They'd rather forget. But you seem different. You want to understand." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of kinship with her. "I've seen things. I heard their voices, the spirits of the patients. They're asking for help, for someone to remember them." She studied me for a moment, then sighed, as if the weight of the past had become too much to bear. "There are archives in the back. Old records, newspaper articles, photographs. It's all there. If you're determined to uncover the truth, you should start there. I thanked her, my heart racing at the prospect of what lay ahead. The archives were tucked away in a small room filled with dust and memories. I entered slowly, taking in the sight of old filing cabinets and boxes stacked haphazardly, each one a time capsule waiting to be opened. I pulled open a drawer, and the musty smell of aged paper filled the air. As I rifled through the contents, I found files detailing patients' admissions, their treatments, and the cruel experiments they had undergone. Each document was a testament to the suffering endured within these walls, a stark reminder of humanity's darkest impulses. One file caught my eye, a thick manila envelope marked with a faded stamp. Inside, I discovered a collection of photographs, their edges frayed and yellowed with time. The images captured moments of despair, patients with hollow eyes staring blankly at the camera, nurses with stern expressions, and a particularly haunting image of a young girl, her face a mixture of hope and fear. "Mary," I whispered, reading the name scrawled on the back of the photo. I felt a pang of recognition, as if I could sense her spirit lingering nearby. You were one of them. The realization hit me hard. Mary was not just a victim, she was a symbol of the countless lives shattered by a system designed to protect and heal but had instead perpetuated suffering. I couldn't let her story fade into oblivion. I had to give her a voice. As I delved deeper into the archives, piecing together the narratives of those who had come before me, a pattern began to emerge. The asylum had been a place of horror, a site where treatment was often experimental and inhumane. The more I uncovered, the more I felt the weight of their stories pressing down on me, urging me to act. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and the woman from the front desk stepped inside. "I thought you might want some company," she said gently. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the chaotic array of files and photographs. "You've uncovered a lot already." "I can't believe what they went through," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "How could this happen?" She looked at me with a mix of sympathy and understanding. Fear can blind people to the truth. They didn't see the patients as individuals, they saw them as problems to be solved. But those stories need to be told, or we risk repeating the past. "Exactly," I said, a fire igniting within me. "I want to share this, share their pain and their resilience. It's time for their voices to be heard." We spent hours poring over the records together, each piece of information adding weight to the growing urgency I felt. I began to formulate a plan, a presentation to the community, a campaign to raise awareness, to make sure that the history of the asylum was not forgotten. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft glow through the windows, I felt a sense of hope wash over me. The darkness that had clung to the park for so long was beginning to lift, replaced by the possibility of healing and recognition. But even as I felt this new strength, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A chill ran down my spine, and I glanced around the room, half expecting to see a shadow lurking in the corners. The whispers, though faint, were still present, urging me on, reminding me that the past was never truly gone. "Let's do this together," I said to the woman, my voice steady. "Let's bring their stories to light." She smiled, a spark of determination igniting in her eyes. "Yes. It's time for the truth to emerge. We will honor their memory." Together, we began to outline our plans, united in a mission to confront the darkness and bring forth the truth of those who had been silenced. The park, with all its haunted beauty, would become a testament to resilience, a place where the stories of the past would no longer be buried but celebrated, ensuring that the echoes of the asylum would resonate in the hearts of all who walked its paths. With a sense of purpose driving us, we stepped out of the archives, ready to face the challenges ahead. The sun rose higher in the sky, illuminating the park in a warm glow, a symbol of the new dawn we were forging, a promise that we would not let the shadows define this place any longer. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.